My name is Claire Wallace, 32 years old, art therapist from Boston. I've always had a complicated relationship with my perfectionist mother, Catherine. Today is her lavish 60th birthday party at Bellini's, the most upscale restaurant in town. There's this strange tension in the air as I enter, carrying a gift I poured my heart into. I never expected what would happen next. When I presented my carefully crafted gift, she looked directly at me and said those words, "You're not good enough to be family." But instead of breaking down, I simply smiled back. Before I dive into how that one response changed everything forever, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear more stories about standing up to toxic family dynamics. Growing up in Beacon Hill, one of Boston's most affluent suburbs, meant living up to impossible standards. My father, Richard, was a renowned cardiovascular surgeon at Massachusetts General Hospital, working long hours and rarely home. My mother, Catherine, was the quintessential socialite, throwing dinner parties for hospital board members, charity organizers, and Boston's elite. Our home was always immaculate, a showcase rather than a place to live comfortably. From my earliest memories, I knew I was different from what my mother wanted. While she dreamed of raising a daughter who would follow in my father's medical footsteps, I was drawn to colors, textures, and expressions of emotion through art. My bedroom was my sanctuary, walls covered with my paintings and sketches, much to my mother's dismay. "Claire, why can't you keep your room presentable like Thomas does?" she would say, referring to my younger brother who was 4 years my junior, but already showing interest in science and medicine. Thomas became the golden child when at age 10 he announced he wanted to be a surgeon like Dad. Mother beamed with pride, while my latest art contest ribbon was met with a dismissive, "That's nice, dear. Now go change for dinner. The Harrisons are coming and I need you to look presentable." Throughout high school, the divide grew deeper. While I excelled in art and humanities, winning state competitions and even having a piece displayed at a local gallery, my mother's response was always the same. "It's a hobby, Claire. You need a real career." When college application time came, the battle lines were drawn. I wanted to study fine arts and psychology, while my mother insisted on pre-med. The arguments grew heated until my father finally intervened one night after a particularly nasty exchange. "Catherine," he said quietly, "let her follow her own path." It was the one time he stood up to my mother on my behalf, though he quickly retreated back into his passive role afterward. That small moment of support gave me the courage to apply to the schools I wanted. When I got accepted to Boston University's psychology program with an art therapy concentration, my mother didn't speak to me for a week. College brought freedom and validation. Away from my mother's constant criticism, I flourished making friends who appreciated my creativity and sensitivity. I discovered art therapy during my sophomore year and knew immediately it was my calling. Using art to help people process trauma and heal emotional wounds combined my passion with purpose. Thomas, meanwhile, sailed through his pre-med courses at Harvard, continuing to fulfill my mother's dreams. Family dinners became showcases for his achievements, while my progress in art therapy was met with comments like, "Playing with crayons isn't going to pay the bills, Claire." After graduation and completing my master's degree, I secured a position at Boston Children's Hospital working with young trauma survivors. The work was challenging but deeply rewarding. Watching children who had experienced unspeakable pain find their voice through art filled me with purpose. It was during this time I met James Miller, a child psychiatrist, who respected my work and saw its value. Our professional relationship slowly blossomed into romance, and for the first time I had someone who truly understood and supported my passion. He was the first person I brought home who could stand up to my mother's subtle digs and passive-aggressive comments without creating a scene. "Your work with those children is remarkable, Claire," he told me after observing one of my sessions. "You have a gift for helping them express what they can't put into words." His support gave me confidence to establish firmer boundaries with my mother. With the encouragement of my own therapist, Dr. Linden, I began working through my deep-seated need for maternal approval. "Your mother's criticism reflects her own insecurities, not your worth," Dr. Linden told me during one particularly emotional session. "You don't need her validation to be whole." I tried believing those words, but 28 years of conditioning was hard to overcome. Every time my mother dismissed my career as playing with paint, it still stung, reopening old wounds of inadequacy and rejection. As my 30th birthday approached, I made a commitment to myself to work on healing these wounds, rather than continuing to seek approval I would never receive. The journey was difficult, with progress measured in small victories. The first time I declined a family dinner because of a work commitment without feeling guilty afterward. the day I stopped apologizing for my career choice during conversations with my mother. Each step was small but significant. Thomas completed medical school and began his residency at the same hospital where our father practiced. My parents threw an extravagant party to celebrate, inviting all their friends and connections. I attended alone as James was at a conference and endured 3 hours of being introduced as our daughter who works with art, while Thomas was lauded as the next brilliant Wallace surgeon. That night, driving home with tears blurring my vision, I called Dr. Linden's emergency line for the first and only time. "I don't think I can do this anymore," I sobbed. "Nothing I do will ever be enough for her." "Then maybe it's time to stop trying," she replied gently. "Your worth isn't determined by your mother's approval, Claire." That conversation marked a turning point. I began attending family events with different expectations, no longer hoping for my mother's approval, but simply setting boundaries to protect myself. I limited visits to holidays and necessary occasions. I redirected conversations when my mother began criticizing my choices. Small acts of self-preservation that slowly built my resilience. And now, with my mother's 60th birthday approaching, I found myself at another crossroads. Knowing the event would test all the progress I had made in therapy. Would I be strong enough to maintain my boundaries? Could I finally attend a family gathering without seeking approval I would never receive? Choosing the perfect gift for my mother's 60th birthday consumed me for weeks. I wanted something meaningful, something that might finally bridge the gap between us. After much deliberation, I decided to create a family portrait, spending countless evenings after work painting each family member with careful attention to detail. The portrait showed my parents seated out in our living room, Thomas standing behind them and me beside him. Unlike photographs where we posed with artificial smiles, I painted us as I wished we could be relaxed, connected, loving. "Are you sure about this?" James asked when I showed him the finished piece. "It's beautiful, but will she appreciate the effort you've put into it?" "I have to try," I replied carefully, wrapping the canvas. "Maybe seeing us as a family will remind her that we are one despite our differences." The morning of the party, anxiety churned in my stomach. I spent extra time selecting my outfit, knowing my mother would scrutinize my appearance. I chose a navy blue dress that was both elegant and conservative, styling my hair in a sleek updo that hid its natural waves. My mother had always preferred my hair straight, saying my natural texture looked unruly. "You look beautiful," James said as I emerged from the bedroom. "But you don't look like yourself," I sighed, recognizing the truth in his words. "I'm trying to minimize potential criticism, one less thing for her to focus on." James squeezed my hand. "Just remember what Dr. Linden said. You're not responsible for your mother's reactions, only your own." The drive to the restaurant was tense. I mentally rehearsed responses to potential criticisms, preparing myself for the inevitable comparisons to Thomas and his fiancée Amanda, who embodied everything my mother valued: medical degree, perfect appearance, and appropriate social connections. "Remember to breathe," James said as we pulled into the parking lot of Bellini's, the most exclusive restaurant in Boston. "I'm here with you the whole time." The restaurant's private room was already half full when we arrived. My father greeted us warmly, if somewhat distractedly, before being pulled away by colleagues. Thomas and Amanda waved from across the room where they were engaged in conversation with hospital board members. My mother stood near the entrance, resplendent in a designer dress, accepting congratulations and compliments from guests. When she spotted us, her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Claire, you're almost late," she said by way of greeting. Her eyes scanned my appearance with clinical precision. "The dress is nice, though you could have done something more interesting with your jewelry." "Happy birthday, Mother," I replied, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "You look wonderful." She accepted the compliment as her due before turning to James. "Dr. Miller, always good to see you. I believe Dr. Harrington wanted to discuss that research paper you published. He's over by the bar." It was a dismissal, plain and simple. James squeezed my hand before moving toward the bar, leaving me alone with my mother. "Is that my gift?" she asked, eyeing the carefully wrapped package in my hands. "Yes, I made it myself," I said immediately, regretting the admission as her expression cooled further. "How creative. You can put it with the others over there." She gestured to a table already laden with expensive-looking packages. "The Petersons just arrived. I need to greet them." "Okay." As she swept away, I placed my gift among the others, noting how small it looked compared to the elaborate packages surrounding it. A familiar sense of inadequacy washed over me, but I took a deep breath, remembering Dr. Linden's words, "Your value isn't determined by comparisons." The evening proceeded with excruciating slowness. Dinner was served, speeches were made. My father spoke about their 40 years together, highlighting Catherine's dedication to his career and community service. Thomas raised a toast to the most supportive mother a son could ask for, conveniently forgetting how she had pressured him relentlessly to follow in our father's footsteps. When it came time for gifts, my mother opened each with appropriate expressions of delight. Designer handbags, jewelry, spa packages, all received with practiced grace. Thomas and Amanda presented her with tickets to the Paris Opera, earning approving murmurs from the assembled guests. Finally, she reached for my package, unwrapping it with less enthusiasm than she had shown the others. As the wrapping fell away, revealing the portrait, a strange silence fell over her face. "What is this supposed to be?" she asked, her voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "It's us," I explained, moving closer. "Our family. I painted it over the last month." She stared at the canvas, her lips pressed into a thin line. "This isn't how we look," she said coldly. "You've made me look older than I am, and your father's hair isn't that grey." The criticism stung, but I pushed forward. "It's not meant to be photorealistic, Mother. It's meant to capture our essence as a family." "And what would you know about family, Claire?" she asked, her voice sharp. "You've rejected everything we value. Your father's legacy, our traditions, our social position." The room had grown uncomfortably quiet, guests pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. "I haven't rejected our family," I said quietly. "I've just chosen my own path." "A path that embarrasses us," she replied, setting the portrait aside dismissively. "Playing with paints when you could have done something meaningful with your life." I felt James's hand on my shoulder, a steady presence amid the storm. "Catherine," he began. "Claire helps traumatized children find their voice. I'd say that's incredibly meaningful." My mother's eyes flashed dangerously. "No one asked for your opinion, Dr. Miller. This is a family matter." "James is family to me," I said, finding strength in his support. "Is he?" my mother asked coldly. "Because from where I stand, you've never understood what family truly means. Family follows tradition. Family maintains standards. Family makes sacrifices for the greater good." Her voice rose with each statement. "You've done none of that. You're selfish, Claire. Always have been. Pursuing your little hobby while your brother carries on our legacy." Tay. The words hit like physical blows, but somehow I remained standing. "Mom," Thomas intervened, clearly uncomfortable. "This isn't the time or place." "When is the time, Thomas?" she snapped. "Your sister has been a disappointment for 32 years. I'm tired of pretending otherwise." She turned back to me, her eyes hard. "The truth is, Claire, you're not good enough to be family. You never have been." The room fell completely silent. I could feel dozens of eyes on me waiting for my reaction. In the past, this moment would have destroyed me, sent me fleeing in tears or stammering apologies. Instead, something unexpected happened. I smiled. Not a forced smile, not a smile hiding pain, but a genuine calm smile that felt like freedom. The smile clearly unsettled my mother more than tears would have. For the first time in my life, I had responded in a way she couldn't predict or control, and her momentary confusion gave me the space to find my voice. The silence in the room was deafening as everyone waited for my response. My mother's words hung in the air like poison, but something inside me had fundamentally shifted. The familiar pain was there, but it no longer had the power to destroy me. "Thank you for your honesty, Mother," I said, my voice steady and clear. "After 32 years, it's actually refreshing to hear you say explicitly what you've implied my entire life." Her eyes widened slightly, unprepared for my composure. She had expected tears, anger, or capitulation. My calm demeanor left her without a script to follow. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, attempting to regain control of the situation. "I've only ever wanted what's best for you." "What you believed was best for me," I corrected gently. "There's an important difference there." James's hand remained steady on my shoulder, grounding me. From the corner of my eye, I could see Thomas watching with something like respect in his expression. "This isn't the place for this discussion," my mother said, glancing around at the guests, who were now openly watching our exchange. "You're right," I agreed. "It's not, but you made it the place when you decided to publicly state, 'I'm not good enough for this family.'" A flush crept up her neck as she realized the scene she had created. My father finally stepped forward, attempting damage control. "Catherine, Claire, perhaps we should continue this privately," he suggested. I shook my head. "No, I think I've spent enough years keeping things private, hiding my feelings to maintain appearances." I turned to address the room, surprised by my own courage. I apologized to everyone for this uncomfortable moment. This isn't how any of us expected the evening to go. I paused, then continued with newfound clarity. But I want to thank my mother for one thing. Her words tonight have finally freed me from a lifetime of seeking approval I was never going to receive. Turning back to my mother, I spoke directly to her. I am good enough, Mother. My work helps children heal from trauma. I've built a career I'm proud of and relationships that nurture rather than diminish me. The fact that it doesn't look like the life you wanted for me doesn't make it any less valuable. I picked up my painting from where she had set it aside. This was my vision of what we could be as a family. I see now that was more wishful thinking than reality, but that's okay. I'm building a new definition of family now. I nodded to James, then to the few relatives in the room who had always shown me kindness. Family isn't just about blood or legacy. It's about acceptance, support, and love without conditions. My mother's face had gone pale, her lips pressed into a tight line. Are you quite finished with your dramatic speech? She asked, her voice brittle. Actually, yes, I replied with unexpected lightness. I am finished, with the speech and with trying to be someone I'm not to please you. I turned to my father. Happy birthday, Mother. Dad, I'll call you next week. Taking James's hand, I walked toward the door, my steps feeling lighter with each moment. As we passed Thomas, he reached out and briefly squeezed my arm, a small gesture of solidarity I hadn't expected. Claire, my mother's voice called after me. If you leave now, don't expect things to be the same. I paused at the door and looked back. I certainly hope they won't be, I replied. Then James and I walked out into the cool evening air, leaving behind the stunned silence of the birthday celebration. In the car, the enormity of what had just happened washed over me. My hands began to shake as the adrenaline ebbed. Are you okay? James asked, concern evident in his voice. I considered the question carefully before answering. I'm not sure, I admitted. But I think I will be. He started the car, glancing at me with pride in his eyes. That was incredible, Claire. I've never seen you stand up for yourself like that. Neither have I said, a small laugh escaping me. I don't know where that came from. It came from you, he replied simply. The real you that's been there all along underneath all your mother's expectations. As we drove away from the restaurant, I looked down at the painting in my lap. The idealized family I had created seemed like a child's fantasy, now a dream I had clung to far too long. But letting go of that dream didn't feel like loss. It felt like making space for something real. The days following my mother's birthday were strangely quiet. I had expected an onslaught of angry calls or flying monkeys sent to bring me back in line, but instead, there was silence. No calls from my mother, no texts from Thomas, not even a peacemaking attempt from my father. It was as if I had stepped off the family stage and the play continued without my character. How are you feeling about the silence? Dr. Linden asked during our next session. Surprisingly okay, I replied, realizing it was true. It's almost peaceful. That's a significant shift, she noted. In the past, being excluded from family communication would have devastated you. I considered this. I think because this time I chose it. I walked away instead of being pushed. James was a steady presence during this time, never pushing me to process faster than I was ready to, simply offering support when I needed it. One evening, as we sat on my apartment balcony sharing a bottle of wine, he asked the question I had been asking myself. Do you regret it? Standing up to her like that? I watched the city lights below us, considering. I regret that it had to happen that way, I finally said. In front of everyone at her birthday. But I don't regret what I said. It was true. What happens now? He asked gently. I shrugged. I don't know. I've never been here before. All my life the pattern was, my mother criticizes, I apologize. We pretend everything's fine until the next time. I broke that pattern. You did more than break it, James said. You shattered it completely. 3 days after the party, my phone rang with Thomas's number. I hesitated before answering, unsure if he was calling as himself or as my mother's proxy. Claire, he said when I answered, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain, do you have time to meet for coffee tomorrow? We arranged to meet at a small cafe halfway between my office and the hospital. When I arrived the next day, I was surprised to find him already waiting, looking tired and more rumpled than his usual polished self. Thanks for coming, he said as I sat down across from him. I wasn't sure you would. Why wouldn't I asked. He gave me a look that suggested the answer was obvious. After what happened at Mom's party, I wouldn't blame you if you wanted nothing to do with any of us. You're still my brother Thomas, I said simply. That hasn't changed. He studied me for a moment. You've changed though. The Claire I grew up with would have been devastated by what Mom said. I was devastated, I admitted, but something shifted when she finally said out loud what she's been implying my whole life. It was almost freeing. Thomas nodded slowly. I need to apologize to you. He said the words seeming difficult for him. I've known how she treats you. I've seen it for years and I never stood up for you. It was easier to be the golden child. His honesty surprised me. You were a kid too, Thomas. We were both just trying to survive in the roles we were given. Still, he insisted, I should have said something sooner. The way she dismissed your career, your choices, it wasn't right. I felt an unexpected warmth toward my brother, seeing him perhaps for the first time as a person separate from our family dynamics. Why now? I asked. What's changed? He looked down at his coffee. Seeing you stand up to her like that, it made me question things, the way our family works, the roles we've all played. He hesitated. And Amanda said some things after the party that made me think. What kind of things? She asked if that's how we really treat each other in our family, if that's the kind of family we want to raise our kids in someday. He met my eyes. She was pretty upset about how Mom treated you. I felt a newfound appreciation for my future sister-in-law. So what now? I asked. I don't know, he admitted. Mom's furious, of course. Dad's trying to keep the peace as usual, but something feels different this time. He paused. Mum wanted me to convince you to apologize. I tensed. And are you going to try? No, he said firmly. That's not why I asked to meet you. I wanted to check if you're okay. The simple question asked with genuine concern brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I think I am, I said. Or I will be. It's strange, but standing up to her felt like putting down a weight I've been carrying my whole life. Thomas nodded. I can see that. You seem lighter somehow. As our coffee stretched into lunch, we talked more openly than we had in years. About growing up under our mother's critical eye, about the pressure Thomas felt to be perfect, about the distance that had grown between us as we played our assigned roles. I've missed you, I admitted as we prepared to leave. The real you, not the golden child. He smiled ruefully. I've missed you too, and I've admired your work more than I've ever said. What you do with those kids, it matters, Claire. Hearing those words from my brother, the family member who had most successfully embodied our mother's ideals, meant more than I expected. The conversation with Thomas marked the beginning of a slow transformation in my relationship with my family. My father called the following week, awkward but sincere in his concern for me. Your mother is struggling with what happened, he said carefully. I imagine she is, I replied. But I'm not ready to pretend it didn't happen, Dad. I know. He sighed. I just don't want to lose you, Claire. You don't have to, I told him. But things need to change. Work became a sanctuary during this time. My sessions with the children at the hospital took on new meaning as I recognized patterns of seeking approval and fear of rejection that mirrored my own experience. One afternoon, working with a young girl who had been abandoned by her mother, I found myself drawing alongside her. What are you making? She asked, peering at my paper. I looked down at the image taking shape under my hands, a small figure standing alone but strong, surrounded by light. I think I'm drawing courage, I told her. She nodded solemnly. That's what I need, to be brave like you. Her words caught me by surprise. What makes you think I'm brave? I asked. You smile even when you're sad, she said simply. That's what brave looks like. Later that week, I received an unexpected email from my Aunt Eleanor, my mother's sister, who had moved to California years ago after her own falling out with my mother. I heard about what happened at Catherine's party, babe, she wrote. It took me 20 years to stand up to my sister. You did it much younger. I'm proud of you, Claire. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. The support from unexpected quarters strengthened my resolve to maintain the boundaries I had established. I declined the next family dinner invitation, sending a polite but firm response that I needed more time. Instead of spending Sunday afternoon enduring my mother's subtle criticism, James and I took a painting class together, laughing at his clumsy attempts and enjoying the simple pleasure of creation without judgment. You're different, he observed as we walked home afterward, canvases tucked under our arms. More yourself somehow. I feel different, I agreed. Like I'm not constantly bracing for the next criticism. It suits you, he said, squeezing my hand. 6 weeks after the birthday incident, my mother called. Seeing her name on my phone screen sent a familiar surge of anxiety through me, but it was less overwhelming than it once would have been. Hello, Mother, I answered, keeping my voice neutral. Claire, she said, her tone equally controlled, I think it's time we talked. 2 months after the confrontation at the birthday party, I sat across from my mother at a small cafe she had suggested for our meeting. The neutral location was her idea, which surprised me. Typically, she would have insisted on meeting at her home where she controlled the environment. She looked smaller, somehow less intimidating than the towering figure of maternal disapproval who had dominated my life. Her perfectly styled hair and impeccable outfit were the same, but something in her demeanor had shifted. Thank you for agreeing to meet, she said stiffly after our coffee arrived. I think it's overdue, I replied, maintaining eye contact despite the urge to look away. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. In the past, I would have rushed to fill it to apologize to smooth things over. This time I waited. Thomas tells me your art therapy program is being expanded, she finally said, surprising me with the topic. Yes, we received additional funding to work with children in the trauma unit, I confirmed. It's a significant recognition of the program's success. Good. She nodded, turning her coffee cup in small circles. He speaks very highly of your work. Another silence fell longer this time. I didn't ask you here to discuss your job, she finally said. Why did you ask me here, Mother? She pressed her lips together clearly, struggling with words that didn't come easily to her. Your father misses you, she said finally. Thomas too. I noted the omission. And you? Her eyes met mine briefly before darting away. Things have been quiet without you. It wasn't an admission of missing me, but from my mother it was significant nonetheless. I've been busy with work, I said, and taking time to process what happened. Yes, well, she straightened her already perfect posture. Perhaps things were said that were overly harsh. I recognized this as the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get. They were honest though, weren't they? You've never thought I was good enough. That's not... Cutting to kind, she began, then stopped herself. I wanted what was best for you. No, I corrected gently. You wanted what you thought was best for the family image. Those aren't the same thing. She flinched slightly at my directness. I raised you with certain expectations, Claire. It's difficult when your child rejects everything you value. I didn't reject everything, I said. Just the parts that required me to be someone I'm not. And I never rejected you, Mother. I just stopped accepting your rejection of me. Her eyes widened slightly at this reframing. I never rejected you, she protested, but the words lacked conviction. Didn't you? I asked softly. Every time you dismissed my art, my career choice, my way of seeing the world. What would you call that? She didn't have an immediate answer, her fingers nervously adjusting her already perfect scarf. I had certain dreams for you, she finally said. A certain path I thought would bring you success. But they were your dreams, not mine, I pointed out, and your definition of success, not mine. For the first time in our conversation, she truly looked at me, seeing perhaps not the disappointment she had labelled me, but the confident professional I had become. You seem different, she said, echoing what others had observed. I am different, I acknowledged. Standing up to you that night changed something in me. I'm not looking for your approval anymore. I'd like your acceptance, but I don't need it to know my worth. She absorbed this, her expression unreadable. And if I can't give you that acceptance, then we'll need to find a new way to relate to each other, I said simply. One that respects both of us. That sounds very therapeutic, she said with a hint of her old dismissiveness. I smiled. It is therapeutic. That's not a bad thing, Mother. Our conversation continued, moving carefully around decades of hurt and misunderstanding. There were no dramatic breakthroughs or tearful reconciliations. Instead, there was something more realistic, two adults attempting to navigate a relationship with new boundaries. As we prepared to leave, she surprised me again. The painting you made, she said hesitantly. I still have it. I had assumed she had discarded it after the party. You do? She nodded. It's in my study. The colours are quite striking. It wasn't praise exactly, but it was acknowledgement. A small step, but significant. Perhaps, she began, then stopped herself. Perhaps someday you could tell me about your work, what you actually do with the children. Thomas says it's quite effective. I'd like that, I said, meaning it. In the following weeks, my relationship with my family began a slow, imperfect transformation. My father called more frequently, making awkward but genuine efforts to connect. Thomas and I established a weekly lunch meeting, rebuilding our sibling relationship outside our mother's influence. And my mother, Well, she remained complicated, occasionally slipping into old patterns, but sometimes surprising me with moments of genuine interest in my life. James watched this evolution with supportive caution. Just remember to maintain your boundaries. He reminded me when my mother invited us to dinner for the first time since the birthday confrontation. You don't have to go back to the old patterns. My professional life flourished during this period of personal growth. The expanded art therapy program garnered attention from other hospitals, and I was invited to present our methods at a regional conference. The night before my presentation, I received a text message that left me staring at my phone in disbelief. "Good luck tomorrow. Your father and I are proud of what you've accomplished." It was from my mother. The words I had longed to hear for decades arrived not when I was desperately seeking her approval, but when I had finally learned to validate myself. 3 months after our cafe meeting, James proposed during a weekend trip to the coast. As I said yes through happy tears, I realized I was entering this commitment from a place of wholeness rather than seeking completion through another person. When we announced our engagement, my mother's response was characteristically measured. "He seems to understand you," she said, which from her was high praise indeed. As we began planning our wedding, I braced for battles over every detail. To my surprise, my mother limited her suggestions to occasional emails with links to venues or florists, always ending with, "Just a thought, it's your day." One evening, as James and I sorted through potential invitations, he asked the question I had been considering myself. "Do you want your mother involved in the planning, given everything that's happened?" I considered carefully before answering. Yes, but on new terms. Not as the director of the event, but as the mother of the bride who gets to participate within boundaries. He nodded, understanding the significance of this decision. "You've come a long way from that night at her birthday party." "I have," I agreed. That moment when I smiled instead of breaking down, it changed everything. The greatest transformation, however, was evident in my work. My experiences informed a new depth in my approach to therapy, particularly with children struggling with parental expectations and conditional love. I developed a workshop specifically addressing familial rejection, using art to help participants externalize and process their emotions. During one particularly powerful session with a teenage girl who had been rejected by her father for her sexual orientation, I shared a piece of my own story. "Someone once told me I wasn't good enough to be family," I told her as we worked side by side. "But I realized that being family isn't about being good enough, it's about acceptance." "What did you do when they said that?" she asked, her hands continuing to shape clay as she spoke. "I smiled," I said. Not because it didn't hurt, but because in that moment I realized their opinion couldn't define me anymore. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine. "I want to get to that place," she said quietly. "You will," I assured her. "And until then, you create family with people who see your worth." 6 months after my mother's birthday party, I stood in my new apartment unpacking boxes with James. My phone rang with my mother's ringtone, and I answered without the knot of anxiety that had once accompanied her calls. "Claire," she said, her voice unusually hesitant. "I was wondering if you and James might join us for dinner this weekend. Thomas and Amanda will be there. They have news they want to share with the family." Family, the word that had once been wielded as a weapon of exclusion. "We'd love to," I replied, catching James's eye as he nodded encouragingly. "Good," she said. After a pause, she added, "And Claire, that piece you wrote for the medical journal about art therapy outcomes, your father and I read it. It was impressive." As I ended the call, James raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Progress," I said with a small smile. "Not perfection, but progress." That evening, as I sorted through my art supplies for the new studio space in our apartment, I came across the preliminary sketches for the family portrait that had sparked the confrontation. Looking at them now, I could see both the wishful thinking they represented and the seeds of my own liberation. I picked up a fresh canvas and began a new painting. This one showed a woman standing alone, yet strong face turned toward the light shadows behind her, but not defining her. As the image took shape beneath my brush, I recognized it as a self-portrait of sorts. Not of who I had been seeking validation, that never came, but of who I had become when I finally smiled back at rejection and chose my own worth. As I put the finishing touches on my self-portrait, I realized how far I had come in the 6 months since that pivotal moment at my mother's birthday party. The painting captured not just my physical likeness, but something deeper, a quiet confidence that had replaced the desperate need for approval that had defined most of my life. My art therapy practice continued to flourish, with referrals increasing as word spread about our program's success with trauma survivors. I had recently been asked to develop a training program for other therapists interested in incorporating art therapy techniques into their practice. "Look at this," James said one evening, handing me his tablet open to an email. "The conference committee accepted your workshop proposal." I scanned the email confirming my presentation at the National Art Therapy Conference in Chicago. They want me to do a 90-minute session on using art to process family rejection. I said, still somewhat amazed that others valued my approach. "They know groundbreaking work when they see it," James replied, pulling me close. Just like I knew an extraordinary woman when I met her. Our wedding plans progressed smoothly with a small ceremony scheduled for the spring. To my ongoing surprise, my mother had maintained her uncharacteristic restraint, offering opinions only when asked and accepting our decisions with minimal commentary. The real test came when my parents invited us to their home for the first time since the confrontation. As James and I approached the familiar door of my childhood home, I felt a momentary return of old anxieties. "Remember, we can leave any time you need to," James whispered, squeezing my hand. My father answered the door, greeting us with genuine warmth. "Claire, James, come in. Everyone's in the living room." Thomas and Amanda sat on the sofa looking excited and slightly nervous. My mother stood as we entered, her usual perfect posture and appearance intact, but something in her expression had softened. "Claire," she said, stepping forward. "Thank you for coming." There was an awkward moment where neither of us quite knew how to greet each other. Finally, I leaned in for a brief hug, feeling her stiffen slightly before returning the gesture. "You look well," she said, her eyes taking in my casual but professional outfit. For once, there was no critique of my appearance, just observation. "Thank you," I replied simply. "So do you." Dinner proceeded with a surprising ease. Thomas and Amanda shared their news they were expecting a child. As congratulations flowed around the table, I caught my mother watching me, perhaps gauging my reaction to the news that would once have triggered feelings of inadequacy and failure to meet expectations. Instead, I felt genuine happiness for my brother and sister-in-law. "That's wonderful," I said sincerely. "You're going to be amazing parents." Later, as coffee was served in the living room, my mother cleared her throat. "Claire, I've been following the expansion of your program at the hospital. The results you're achieving with those children are remarkable." The compliment, delivered without qualifications or comparisons, took me by surprise. "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot coming from you." A flicker of something crossed her face, recognition perhaps of how rare her validation had been throughout my life. "Your father and I were discussing it," she continued. "The Hospital Foundation is planning its annual fundraiser, and we thought perhaps your program might be featured this year. If you're interested." I glanced at my father, who nodded encouragingly. "It's important work, Claire," he said. "Work that deserves recognition and support." This offer represented more than a fundraising opportunity. It was an acknowledgement from my parents that my chosen path had value, that the career they had dismissed for so many years was worthy of their social and professional endorsement. "I'd like that," I said simply. As the evening drew to a close, my mother walked us to the door while my father helped Thomas carry some baby items Amanda had been given to their car. "Claire," my mother said, her voice unusually hesitant. "That night at my birthday, the things I said," I waited curious to see if an actual apology would materialize. "They were cruel," she finally said, "and untrue." Gemein. It wasn't quite an "I'm sorry," but from my mother, this admission was significant. "Yes, they were," I agreed quietly. "You've never asked why I was so hard on you," she observed. "I assumed it was because I wasn't what you wanted," I replied honestly. She shook her head slightly. "You were exactly what I feared." "What do you mean, Kate?" "Independent, creative, unwilling to conform." She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her sleeve. "I was that way once before I met your father, before I became what was expected of a surgeon's wife." This glimpse into my mother's history explained so much about our relationship. "You gave up your own dreams," I realized aloud. "It was a different time," she said with a slight shrug. "But watching you forge your own path, it was like watching the road not taken. It was easier to criticize than to face my own regrets." The honesty of this confession stunned me. "I never knew," I said softly. "How could you? I never spoke of it." Entspannt. She straightened, her moment of vulnerability passing. "In any case, what matters is that you stood your ground. When you smiled at me that night instead of breaking down, I saw something in you I've always lacked: true confidence." As James and I drove home, I processed this new understanding of my mother. All these years, I thought she hated who I was, I told him. But she was really fighting with herself with her own choices. Does that make it hurt less? He asked gently. I considered the question. Not exactly, but it helps me understand. And it confirms what I've come to believe her criticism was never really about me. The months that followed brought continued healing and growth. My relationship with my mother would never be the perfect bond I had once longed for, but it evolved into something more honest, and in its way more meaningful. We established a cautious respect for each other's boundaries, and occasionally, in unguarded moments, something like genuine connection emerged. Our wedding day arrived with unusual spring sunshine, warming the garden venue we had chosen. As I prepared in a small cottage on the grounds, there was a knock at the door. "Claire!" "It's me," my mother's voice called. I opened the door to find her standing there, perfectly dressed, as always, holding a small box. "You look beautiful," she said, her eyes taking in my simple but elegant dress, my hair arranged in loose waves, rather than the sleek style she would have preferred. "Thank you," I replied, genuinely touched by the compliment. She handed me the box. "I thought you might want these today." Inside was a pair of pearl earrings I recognized from my childhood. "Grandmother's pearls," I said softly. My mother nodded. "She was an artist too, you know, before she married. My father thought it was frivolous." She paused. "I should have told you that sooner. You're more like her than anyone in the family." As I put on the earrings, my mother watched with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Claire," she said hesitantly, "I know I haven't been the mother you deserved, but I am proud of the woman you've become, despite me, not because of me." It was perhaps the most honest thing she had ever said to me, and certainly the most self-aware. "Thank you for saying that," I replied, feeling unexpected tears form. "It means a lot." She nodded, her own composure slightly cracked. "Well," she said, retreating to safer ground, "I should let you finish getting ready. Your father is waiting to walk you down the aisle." At the reception, I watched my family interact with my friends and colleagues from the hospital. My mother engaged in conversation with my fellow art therapists, listening with what appeared to be genuine interest as they explained their work. Thomas and Amanda circulated his hand protectively over her growing belly. My father beamed with pride as he introduced me to his colleagues as my daughter, the art therapist, who's revolutionizing trauma treatment for children. James found me observing this scene, slipping his arm around my waist. "Happy?" "Yes," I said, realizing it was entirely true. And not because everything's perfect, it's not, but because I'm finally okay with that. As our first dance ended, I caught sight of my mother watching from the edge of the dance floor. When our eyes met, she smiled. Not her usual controlled social smile, but something more genuine. I smiled back, not out of defiance this time, but with the peaceful recognition that we had both in our own ways grown from that painful confrontation. In the year that followed, my professional life continued to expand. The training program I developed was adopted by 3 additional hospitals, and I was invited to contribute a chapter to a textbook on innovative approaches to childhood trauma. Thomas and Amanda welcomed a healthy baby boy, making me an aunt and my parents' first-time grandparents. My relationship with my mother continued its careful evolution. There were still moments of tension, old patterns that threatened to re-emerge, but we had found a new way to navigate them. She had begun painting again hesitant watercolours that she showed almost no one, except occasionally me. "They're not very good," she said dismissively when she first revealed this hobby. "They're a beginning," I replied. Everyone starts somewhere. The greatest reward came in my work with clients struggling with family rejection. One young woman, after 6 months of art therapy, created a powerful piece depicting herself standing strong despite the absence of parental support. "I used to think there was something wrong with me," she told me during our final session, "that I wasn't enough. Now I know the problem was never me." "How does that feel?" I asked. She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Like freedom." I recognized in her expression the same liberation I had felt when I smiled back at my mother's rejection. The moment when external validation lost its power to determine self-worth. That night, I sat in my home studio, adding final touches to a painting for my upcoming exhibition. James leaned against the doorway watching me work. "What are you going to call that one?" he asked, nodding toward the canvas. I stepped back, studying the image of a woman standing in her power, surrounded by both shadows and light, her face serene despite the storm clouds in the background. "I think I'll call it Smile Back," I said. For the moment, everything changed. Life isn't perfect. Relationships, especially family ones, remain complex and sometimes difficult. But that moment when I chose to smile back at rejection rather than be destroyed by, it transformed not only how others saw me, but more importantly, how I saw myself. It taught me that sometimes the most powerful response to someone telling you that you're not enough is simply to smile, knowing in your heart that you are. If you've ever faced rejection from someone whose approval you desperately wanted, I hope my story reminds you that your worth isn't determined by their assessment. Sometimes, the most healing response to rejection is not to fight back or break down, but to smile with the quiet confidence that comes from truly knowing your own value. Have you ever had a moment when you stood in your power against someone who tried to diminish you? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need this reminder today. Thank you for joining me on this journey of healing and self-discovery. Remember, you've always been enough exactly as you are.